Good evening. I'm Scott Little with Harleysville Bank, and I'm the co-chair of the Architectural and Environmental Committee. Welcome to the 2023 Environmental Seminar hosted by the Central Bucks Chamber of Commerce and planned by the Architectural and Environmental Committee. Our topic tonight is land stewardship, basically responsible land use throughout Bucks County. And our program would not be possible this evening without our sponsors. So let me introduce you to our major sponsor tonight, Carroll Engineering, Tom Gokowski. Come on up, Tom. Give Tom a round.
Thank you, Scott. Carroll Engineering is delighted to be a part of the Architectural and Environmental Committee, and we've been a longtime sponsor of this event as well as a tour, which is on deck for next spring. We've got an excellent panel of speakers today, and I look forward to hearing what they say. So thank you all for coming. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Tom. Great. I also want to thank our other sponsors for this evening, Green Terra Disposal, Harleysville Bank, Phillips and Donovan Architects, and the Sustainable Energy Fund. Something like this takes a lot of people to put together, so we also have some other thank yous I want to put in. So Tom Brunt with TebWeb for our live stream. Yes, you are all on camera right now, just so that you know, all right? For our audio visual, we did these amazing things up here so that we could be promoting our sponsors. Anne-Marie Metis, who is doing our portraits by Anne-Marie. She's taking our photos of the event. Graze Craze for donating the food. The Architectural Environmental Committee members, could you put your hands in the air? Wave them like you don't care. Thank you. Thank you for all your help. Our Central Bucks Chamber of Commerce team members, same thing. We couldn't do this without all of you. Especially happy and thankful to the Doylestown Borough for the use of their amazing facility tonight. And lastly, I also want to thank our friends from the Architectural Institute of America, the Bucks County chapter for their attendance tonight. We're thrilled to have you. So now let me introduce the stars of the show this evening, our illustrious panelists. I will introduce each one and then we'll just applaud for them all together. How's that sound? Good? All right. First up, one of our panelists is Chris Kern, Director of Resource Protection, Heritage Conservancy. Rob Lockery, he's the president of Nehemiah Development Company. Kyle McCoy, CEO and president of the Mercer Museum and Fonthill Castle, Bucks County Historical Society. Joe Phillips, owner, principal of Phillips and Donovan Architects, and currently the serving president of the Bucks County chapter of American Institute of Architects. Now you can clap. I told you I'd get you at least one round of applause, right? So.
Thanks.
All right, what I would like to do is for each one of you, and we'll start with Chris, to just give us 2 or 3 minutes of your role at where you're at, what you're doing, and how it pertains to land stewardship. Chris, would you start us off, please?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I am with Heritage Conservancy. We are an accredited land trust. We've been in business for 65 years, starting in 1958. Stewardship is part of our mission. We seek to preserve and protect our natural and historic resources. We do that in a variety of ways, which I hope we'll be able to share some examples throughout the evening. Working with individual landowners to protect their property, working with municipalities to protect open spaces for the public. And of course, once the land is protected, that's really just the beginning. We can't have conservation without responsible stewardship. So we also have a strong focus on educating landowners and public partners about best management practices for the environment.
Thank you very much. Rob?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And good evening, everyone. I'm Rob Lockery, president and owner of Nehemiah Development Company. I'll take a second and give a little Bible lesson here. So Nehemiah is a book in the Bible. It's the Old Testament, if you're wondering where that name came from. And if you read that or read that, I kind of see him as sort of one of the first redevelopers. He was called to rebuild, restore, and renew not just the walls of Jerusalem that were broken, but also the community, the fellowship in that area. So that's sort of how I got that name. And I'm a developer, so sometimes that might be an oxymoron with land stewardship. But our goal and our focus is to balance economic development, community development opportunities with the land and the community. So I was just reflecting this week. There's a dear friend of mine that I'm sure some people in this room know, Pete Krause, who passed away. And he taught me a lot about economic development and redevelopment. And I remember one of the first tasks I had, almost 30 years ago, was coordinating the enterprise zone in Bucks County, which was sort of all the old industrial properties in Lower Bucks. And the idea there was to stir economic development, but also to sort of reuse, repurpose some of those older industrial sites. So particularly been reflecting on that lately over the last week since his passing, but it kind of brings me back to the whole point of what we do, which is to try to restore, renew, and rebuild in the communities here in Bucks County and some other places as well.
Thanks, Rob. Kyle?
I'm Kyle McCoy. I am the president and CEO of the Bucks County Historical Society. And for some of you who don't know, we run both the Mercer Museum and Fonthill Castle. I've been in the business of museums and historic sites for about 24 years. I first started in Arizona, where we had 7 museums in 4 different cities, lots of travel, lots of different types of historic sites. I went to Indiana after that, and that was 1 building in 1 city. And I really got kind of bored with that after a while because there really wasn't too much of the heritage preservation going on. And when I first found out about Doylestown, Bucks County, the Mercer Museum and Fonthill Castle, like any other good American, I cyberstalked at first and thought it was one of the most unique places that I had ever seen in my life and really, really wanted to come work here. And there's a long history of both properties that I think many of you know are legacies of Henry Mercer. And tonight I'm going to go over a little bit of the history of how we wound up here and why we have decided now is the time for us to implement Mercer's legacy for the community using the Fonthill grounds.
Thank you very much. Joe?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Phillips with Phillips and Donovan Architects. Also on the Architectural and Environmental Committee, co-chair that with Scott. But tonight, I'm really here representing AIA Bucks County, which is our chapter of about 90 members of the community of architects in Bucks County. So I'm here to speak for architects. You know, many people think of architects as primarily working on buildings, but many of us also provide land planning services. And, you know, our buildings sit on land. So, you know, we are involved in land stewardship. It's difficult, you know, many times to separate the land from the building, sometimes a tenuous balance. But, you know, we work in preservation, we work in adaptive reuse. You're sitting in an adaptively reused building tonight that our firm had the opportunity to be involved with. Preservation, adaptive reuse, they help to preserve land, of buildings, help to preserve land, undeveloped land, and help to maintain that sense of history and place that a place like Doylestown and a place like Bucks County has. I mean, you can't reproduce what we have here anywhere, much like you can't reproduce San Antonio or wherever, but, you know, you travel and people know of Bucks County. When they ask you where you're from, you say Bucks County, they know they know where that is, or they've seen the pictures. So, you know, along with that goes sustainability. You know, an adaptively reused building is probably the most sustainable building there is, because you've saved a lot of demolition and a lot of waste and energy that went into the original materials. And then also we're going to touch tonight on something that AIA National is starting to focus on, which is resilience and adaptation in design to the storm events and the hazards that we're having. And Sustainability and resilience, they work hand in hand, but they are slightly different. Sustainability is really the building's impact on the environment, and then resilience is the environment's impact on a building. So we'll get to touch on that a little bit.
Great, thank you very much. Now, when I thought of land stewardship and I thought about development, and I've lived in Bucks County for most of my life, and I thought to myself, what do I like to see most? And I don't know if you share this with me, but what I like most is when I drive by a pristine field and one of the Heritage Conservancy signs shows up and it says that this lot has been permanently preserved. Sorry, Rob, sorry, Joe, no disrespect intended, or any of the architects in the room. So I thought it would just make sense to start with Chris and start with her and the Heritage Conservancy. And so Chris, I want to ask you, so how does the Heritage Conservancy, go about finding and soliciting land for preservation?
Right now, we have the good fortune of a lot of inquiries coming to us. So half of our work, I would say over half of our work, is working with private landowners who want to protect their land. And so they reach out to us to educate themselves and find out if there are opportunities to do that. We also work with municipalities. We're very fortunate in Bucks County. Both Rob and I were over at the county for a while. So we've got a lot of municipal funding available for land preservation in Bucks County, as well as at the county level. So we do partner with townships and boroughs for their land preservation needs. And either between those individual phone calls that we get or working with municipalities, we'll do outreach to landowners for informational sessions, and then we'll get inquiries that way. And I have to say, I know you're just teasing, but the work that, is done with Rob's projects, I do hats off, as well as Joe with this building and others. I was raised by a father who did a lot of adaptive reuse, infill projects. So that hopefully will be my next career. But I definitely see them balancing one another, because we all need places to live, work, eat, and those things. But it's that responsibility component and balance.
So are there any places, locations in Bucks County where the Conservancy sees there's a gap or that you're trying to focus on at this time?
Well, I just want to highlight where we're sitting this evening. So this was a great partnership. Over 20 years ago, Heritage Conservancy had an agreement with PennDOT, who was the previous owner of this building and then the land across the street, which was their maintenance yard. And so our organization had a vision for what that may become. Then 20 years passed and things evolved, and the borough reached out and identified it as, a place that they would like to rehab for their uses. And so I know that we couldn't have done it any better. I mean, the borough has just done a superb job with the reuse of this building, with the park across the street. So I would say even in small boroughs where you think that there isn't an opportunity, it's all on a scale. And, there are definitely some places around here that we've got our eyes on.
That's good to know. So if any of you have land that's just burning a hole in your pocket, Chris is here this evening. You can stop by and tell her about it. So thank you very much.
Scott, if I could just add, I think, what Chris was saying is, I think it's a balance between preservation and, if you want to call it, development. Everything that comes Heritage Conservancy's way may not be the ideal property to preserve, but pieces of it might be. So I know that in their past, they've worked with owners to, maybe there is a piece of it that is better used for, something else that would have a building on it. And, in my understanding, and I'll be corrected by Chris, but, that helps to sustain the preservation efforts as well and to fund those so that, you can do that, so.
Very good. beautiful bucolic fields with deer frolicking and butterflies. Okay, is awesome. But the next one in my mind, I'm thinking, why not? Let's just make sure we preserve what we've got. Chris, you gave us a great example of what we have here in the borough and how it was improved and it has been changed. I'd like to ask Kyle. When I think of the Bucks County Historical Society, I don't immediately think of land or preservation or improvement. So Kyle is here to tell us about what the Historical Society has going on and how it's going to impact the locations of both Font Hill and Mercer. So Kyle, tell us about that, please.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question that I would like for the community to understand is this building and land has been there for how long now, and why now? Why are you paying attention to it now? And there is just a little bit of history that I want to go over. I promise it's not going to be long, and I'm not going to test you on the years. But when Henry Mercer died in 1930, his last will and testament left Font Hill to a group of trustees that no longer existed by the time of 1954. In 1963, there was a lease agreement between the Bucks County Historical Society's trustees that didn't exist anymore and the county. And between 1963 and 2018, that's how it was. And that's one of the reasons why you can see most estates, most historic estates around the country, the land is symbiotic with the building. And it wasn't that way here because there were two different groups that were in charge of, one in charge of the land, one in charge of the building. And as a matter of fact, Rob was one of the commissioners when I said, I have to have the wrong lease. This can't be the same lease. And then we found out that, yeah, it was signed in 1963. I won't tell you how old I was then, but I was like, a lot has changed since 1963. And so the county decided with us that we needed to separate that agreement and modernize it and try to keep up with the times. And so we started looking at the land and some of the challenges at the 69 acres that Font Hill sits on, and had some environmental studies and some ecological studies that we started doing, and started realizing that the land was really being damaged out of nothing else, just that when Henry had it, the subdivisions all around didn't exist. Stormwater management was a huge issue that was tearing up the land from Court Street all the way back to North. And that waterway went underneath North Street and continues all the way down to the Delaware River. And so we all know kind of what happened in 2020. We kind of had to take a little pause in 2020 and 2021. But what we did see was, as a result of COVID, even more people in the community were using the land. And so we, as a board and as the leadership of the museum, decided we really needed to accentuate that and take care of some of the challenges that we have so it is preserved for the future. And I always, think about it as, you've heard the saying, I don't even know who said it, but somebody is sitting under the shade of a tree because somebody planted it years ago. And that's kind of what I'm thinking of. These 69 acres, if we can take care of them now, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, it will still be around. We have one of the big partnerships that's going on right now is between the borough and the township and the Bucks County Historical Society on the stormwater management issue. Font Hill sits in the township. It is surrounded by the borough, so everybody has to be involved with the decisions that are being made here. And we're waiting to start it. You'll start seeing it from Court Street as you go up into Font Hill. On the right-hand side, you will start seeing some of the stormwater management taking place. It's not the most exciting topic, but it is so needed, and it is so important for the land to keep its health. And, we'll keep everybody up on the information as it's coming out, but that's really the biggest thing for us.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm sure you'll have some other details to tell us in a little bit. What I'm going to do now is I want to shift gears just a little bit in our topic and discuss the planning that actually goes into development, which starts often with the architect and the land planning end of it. So we have seen significant climate change over the last 10 and 20 years, and that is now making its way into the architectural world. And I know one of the things Joe had brought up earlier was resilience design or resilient design. Joe, would you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, basically, resilient design is basically designing structures and infrastructure, so that they can withstand the natural disasters that we've been having, which have been increasing over time. And, by doing this, we can reduce the damage from those disasters. We can also increase our economic resilience because I'll get to it in later. But, I mean, the amount of money that's spent after the fact on these storms is just incredible. So if we can prepare for them beforehand, we don't need to spend for them after, and it's cheaper to spend the money beforehand than after. It also, helps to increase the quality of life of residents because they're not displaced or having to worry about these natural disasters that we've been having, and, keeps them safer. I don't know about you guys, but I remember when I was a kid, there was this rumor or legend of a tornado that went down Broad Street in Hilltown in 1945 or 55 or whenever it was, but I never experienced anything like that. In the last 2 or 3 years, I think I've been drug in the basement by my wife like 5 or 6 times because as recently as like a month ago, because now you can watch it on your phone and oh my gosh, it popped up over here. So that's really what it's about, to make our buildings and our sites and infrastructure more resilient before these storms happen so that they're easy to recover from.
So for the architects in the room, where does one go to get this? Is this something that the AIA is promoting and putting together, or?
Well, it basically starts with building codes. That's what's really governing a lot of this. I mean, a lot of it just makes common sense. Like we live in a lot of places probably where we shouldn't, and we've built buildings a lot of places where we shouldn't, and we've started to recognize that and even move out of some of these areas and kind of reclaim them. But it really starts with the building codes, and there is movement on a national level anyway in Congress, both the House and the Senate, with some legislation that will fund some of this to 50%, I think, and they're mostly rural areas in the United States of the townships or municipalities, we'll call them. They don't even have building codes. So as architects, we actually appreciate, or at least I do, when there's a building code, because a lot of times you're trying to do what's best. I mean, our one requirement is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of people. We're bound to do that by our license. So we actually like when there's codes in place because we can point to it and say, you really need to do this. It's not just nice to do. So, and there's going to hopefully be some money that starts to support these municipalities that don't have it to implement codes and to train the building inspectors and code officials.
Great, thanks. So what I heard, Joe, was that the next time Rob wants to design something, he's going to have to spend extra money from a resiliency standpoint. Or no, I'm sorry, I'm only kidding. I just see the wheels turning on it. Everything costs money, but you made the point. It's often cheaper to fix it before it's broken. Does that make any sense? All right, we didn't leave you out, Rob. So I did want to ask you, I'm not going to ask you about incorporating resiliency into your designs. This is something pretty new. But I did want to ask, though, is that how does Nehemiah balance, best practices of land stewardship and the economics of when planning and development?
Yeah, I would answer that. I think our approach, or at least the projects that we look for, are projects that I think that are balanced from the beginning. So I won't, we're not exclusive with this, but this is primarily what we look at. And there are two things. I mean, you've heard them mentioned here. Joe mentioned the words a couple of times, and Chris did too. It's sort of infill development and adaptive reuse. And I think when we're looking at those projects, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail here, I think just by virtue of looking at them, they're balanced, right? We're thinking about the land, we're thinking about the community and the environment around that land, or we're thinking about existing buildings, like we've mentioned this building and how we reuse them. So from an infill side, I look at that as sort of looking at those unused or underutilized parcels. They could be land or have a building on them that are already sort of in a built environment. And I think a couple of things with that. The infrastructure's sort of there, existing. And it's relatively close to what you're trying to do. So you're not trying to bring in big sewer lines or water lines or electric or things like that. And that infrastructure for in many cases in a Doylestown or a Dublin are probably aged, old. They need to be updated, which is costly, but maybe not as costly as trying to build everything new or bringing it in a half a mile away into that location. So when we think about roads, water, sewer, electric, gas, fiber, things like that in a built environment, it's sort of already there, or it's close to being there. And so infill is something that we're particularly interested in looking at. And I think in and of itself, that sort of balance, thinking about the land and thinking about the economics. Adaptive reuse, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have an infill site that doesn't have a building on it. You can have an infill site that has a building on it. But just to talk about adaptive reuse, I mentioned early on, we look and are interested in looking at being able to repurpose buildings, restore, renew buildings, and reusing them in a way that benefits the community, but is also, I think Joe hit the nail on the head. I mean, you're reusing, I love the way you put it, sort of all the energy that was put into building that building in the beginning, right? Because we don't think about, a brand new building. Where did they get the wood? Where did they get the concrete? All those things, real energy that has to go into that. So, the adaptive reuse component, while it can be more costly at times, I think in the long run, at least from our perspective, we see that as being, sort of that balance instead of building new. Now, having said that, we've built new, but we also, look to reuse buildings as much as we can. So that's the balance that we play. And it's just by my nature, sort of what I'm passionate about. So I'm more interested in finding those projects. And I think by that, we tend to look at things in a more balanced perspective, considering the land and considering the economics of the project as well.
I think that's a good point. I love that you're making the economic point of how much effort and resources were put into originally building it. The other thing is that if you're going to tear it down, we don't do that for free. That requires time, energy, and expenses as well too. So all good things. Did you have any one environmental component that really stands out to you, Rob, when you're looking to do a project? Or is there an example of a situation that you've had to deal with?
When you say any one environmental component,
As a banker, I do commercial lending. We hate when we find out there's an environmental issue with a project. So all I know
that
is
kind
that
of
I'm not.
environmental. Sometimes I'm a glutton for punishment with the projects we go after. But just to use the example in Dublin, we multiple parcels that we acquired, assembled to into one big development project at the end of the day. But there were a couple of different true environmental problems on both of on two parcels in particular. The first was the station, which was the old Dublin gas station. Now, we did not clean that up. The prior owner cleaned it up, and at a big cost and a long time. But actually, we had to clean up one of the properties that we acquired. Back in the day, had greenhouses on it. Small greenhouses. You wouldn't think anything from a greenhouse, and I can't tell you because I can't remember, but I know it cost me a fortune to remove all the soil that was underneath those greenhouses because of arsenic or whatever would have been in that. So
You would think greenhouse. So it's just natural.
I'm
It's
thinking
all
flowers.
natural.
This is great. The guy grew tomatoes, I think is what it was. And like, how could that be bad? And I was, it's funny, I was mentioning the enterprise zone earlier and just thinking about sort of, a lot of the industrial properties in Bucks County, but particularly in lower Bucks County, U.S. Steel being a great example. There's thousands of acres being reused there that were very much contaminated. And, now today there's a lot of development going on there, but there's all kinds of examples in and around the county where you sort of weigh that cost and that risk of the environmental cleanup, but at the same time, you're then getting a pretty good piece of property that you're able to put back into the community and into the market, and those economics seem to work out.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was coming to you anyway, Chris.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
jump right in.
I just
Perfect.
wanted
Look at that, a
to
perfect segue.
piggyback on Rob's comments in that, when we're dealing with land conservation, it isn't always with pristine resources. This property is an example of that. There was some cleanup needed on the maintenance yard as part of this. About 5 years ago, Heritage Conservancy acquired 80 acres in Croydon in Lower Bucks, just off the Delaware River, that was part of a Superfund site. No direct activities occurred on that property, but as part of a plume with water contamination. So, we're in the business of perpetuity. When we have a conservation easement, it lasts forever with that property recorded on its deed. So yes, it may have an issue today, but we're in it for the long haul, and how can we participate in improving its health?
So can you give us an example of something that may have to be done prior to that easement being issued?
Sure. We have one example now where there's an above-ground storage tank, for home fuels, but it is empty right now, but we are requiring the landowner to remove it. That's a super easy one. I think it's funny that you mentioned the greenhouses. This is going back quite a few years, but we were contacted by a property owner that had greenhouses. And, we did that risk assessment. And for us, it was too great without having a source of income for that remediation. So, perhaps that may be a pass for us for land conservation, but it could be an amazing opportunity, and the economics make sense for redevelopment.
I find it very interesting that somebody who would like to donate their land could actually be told, no, thank you.
We do have criteria, and I think if we said yes to everything, it might not carry as much meaning. We have limited funds for the work that we do, so we really have to prioritize the projects.
So what benefit is it to me if I donate land and to put an easement on it? Is there a financial benefit to the landowner?
There may be. I like to start with the real important benefits, that extend to us all, that good stuff like clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, just that quality of life, sense of community that we all benefit from. I think we live here, have chosen to live here in part because of those qualities. The financial aspects are often part of it. We're dealing with properties that people own. It's often their largest investment. When a property owner is interested in conveying a conservation easement, there may be financial consideration. It's a rather complicated process, but if we get an appraisal similar to the one you would get on your home today that determines what the value of that easement is worth. And the landowner may be compensated for a portion or all of that value. There is also some benefit for landowners to donate that value. I'll leave it to your tax attorney and legal advisor, but you could possibly take a charitable tax deduction for your federal income taxes.
Great, thank you very much.
And Scott, can I just jump in on that for a
Kyle,
little
you're
bit?
reading my mind. I'm thinking, how am I going to shift from that to Kyle? And then
Well,
perfectly.
it just so
Jump right in.
happens that, part of what we're trying to do is to preserve a 69-acre green space in the middle of the borough and the township. There are lots of different ways for, reuse of buildings and things like that, but to preserve a 69-acre plot of land is a different kind of thing. And I've been working with Chris as we're trying to figure out, first of all, people think that the whole area is protected, and it's not. It happens to be private property of the Bucks County Historical Society, but it's not protected under any conservation easement or anything like that. Henry's will is the one that kind of guides us through this point, and that's what we're trying to do. His idea was to make an arboretum. Then he augmented his will later to add a bird sanctuary. And so I don't know anything about birds, but I will rely on the ecological studies and stuff that we're doing. But we're looking at that same thing. How do we preserve this big chunk of land in the middle where all of this other building is going on? It is part of the community. It's a unique piece of land. It is a huge economic driver as far as attracting people to the area from all over. You know, I know my brother-in-law was driving down one of the interstates in New Jersey, and Visit Bucks had put Fonthill Castle on one of the billboards. And I got a text shortly after, and they're like, "Your castle's on a billboard," you know? But, you know, that's the important thing about Fonthill and the grounds. It's a complete community gem. It's a travel attraction. It is a health and wellness thing for this community. And we're just trying to make sure that it is still healthy in all perpetuity. The storms that have happened, the emerald ash borer, have really taken a toll on the canopy in the healthy part of the woodlands. You know, just between 2018 and 2019, BCHS spent over $100,000 just to take down some of the sick and dangerous, hazardous trees for people that were walking along the pathways. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make that land healthy again so it can go on. And like Chris, like what you were saying, the clean water and air, that all has an impact. And, you know, last but not least on this is we are such a hybrid kind of project right now, and we've been trying to find another project like this in the country, and we haven't been able to find it yet. But what we're trying to do is to create a publicly accessible park on private land with private money. And that is 100% for the benefit of the community. You know, like most arboretums and things like that, they fence them in and then you have to pay an admission to get in, and we're not going there. That's not what the whole objective of this is. But we're looking to Chris for help to see if a conservation easement or some sort of combination can help protect the land in perpetuity.
It's good to know that mobile homes won't be going in anytime behind Fonthill.
Oh, don't even joke about that. They'll run me out of town.
They're all shooting daggers at me right now, Colin, for even bringing it up. When I was reflecting on this, I thought it was interesting because we're coming back to you, Joe, with resilient design. I'm thinking Henry Mercer was way ahead of his time, building buildings with concrete. I don't think a tornado would have any effect on the museum or the castle.
Don't say that out loud either.
So would you like me to just end my portion right here?
There somewhere that's covered up.
There's actually a question in here somewhere. So, Joe, you're talking to us about resilient design. What are the policies that need to be put in place for future projects? You did allude to it a little bit earlier, but tell us what specifics, maybe legislatively or things that are coming up. I know you did a ton of research for this, so this is your opportunity to educate all the architects in the room.
Yeah, well, I actually had an opportunity with AIA National to go to Capitol Hill, I guess back in February, and actually lobby for the first time, which was a great experience. Meeting with mostly aides because Congress was in recess then, but we did. AIA is sponsoring, and I'm going to have to read this because anything with the national government has these long names. So. But we have a Resilient America bill that we're trying to spearhead and promote to Congress. And there are bills in both the House and the Senate right now. And hopefully, they made their way partway through in the last session, but hopefully this session they'll get through. But it's called the... They have a program, FEMA has a program called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, BRIC program, and that's part of the bill entitled Resilient America Act, Resilient Assistance for Mitigation for Environmentally Resilient Infrastructure and Construction by Americans. But this is a bill that basically is going to give FEMA some money to do what they really want to do and need to do. It's going to increase their funding for this type of work from 6% to 15% of their budget. It's going to fund some of these things I was talking about with codes, building code official, education. Also, part of what they're looking at is potentially enacting mandatory retrofit adaptation work, but it has to be funded somehow. You can't just say you got to do it and then not help people do it. So part of the funding will be to establish a residential resilience retrofit grant program that people can count on to do that. So that's working its way through. And what the National Institute of Building Sciences, NIBS, has found, there's been a lot of studies done on this and coming back, for every $11 you spend pre-disaster, for every $1 you spend pre-disaster, you save $11 post-disaster. So it really, it makes sense. And there's movement. Brian Fitzpatrick from this area, he's in support of both these bills. I think he's even, sponsoring one of them, so.
So if I'm designing a building and with resiliency in mind, what's the number one thing I need to do? I mean, I'm thinking, I'm pretty simple. I'm just a lender. I don't know exactly how you would design a building that would withstand. I mean, we've got so many different things. The increase of if you're down at the shore, obviously you're going to have higher water. Pennsylvania is experiencing higher rainfall, it seems, so where there's more flooding. So can you put a few details to that, please?
In our area, I think it's mainly wind and water, really. I mean, some things are wildfires and earthquakes and so on, but we don't have to worry about those much in our area. But, it's basically foundation, roofs, and walls. I mean, we need to make sure that they withstand the forces that we're starting to see. If you drive down 309 towards Fort Washington, you see the tornado went through there and everyone's roof was gone, right? So that's where the codes come in to start to allow us to do that. And part of this retrofit, which is really important as well, is you get on some of these coastal areas like the shore or even here with wind. And if there's a building closer to the coast that isn't designed properly, it will wash or blow into another building and take that building down. So that's why the retrofit portion of this is so important as well.
Yeah, I've heard many times that FEMA spends a lot of their budget on just buying homes and properties that are in flood zones. So I'm sure that'll continue to be a part of it. I want to come back to you, Rob. I think there's a PowerPoint of pictures. Can we put those up there, please? You alluded to the Dublin project, and we're talking about adaptive reuse. So take us through some of that. Specifically, what I'm looking for is what were some of the challenges? I mean, I know it was a factory at one point. It was a bunch of teeny tiny offices most recently. Tell us a little bit about the concept of the Dublin Town Center and how it's revitalized. I'm seeing a lot more, I know Karina's here, I'm seeing a lot more marketing, and I'm hearing a buzz from people that this is the in place to go hang out. So kudos for you for developing such a cool place.
Thank you. And Brad, but interesting, before I answer that question, you're talking about resilient design, and you made the comment about Henry Mercer being ahead of his time and all that. But so think about it, there's a lot of old farmhouses in Bucks County. I live in one that was built in 1814. And when you were referencing the tornadoes, I remember the night that the tornado came through Bedminster, and my wife, the alarm went off, and she's like, and I'm like, there's not a tornado. There's just not a tornado. And I'm like, besides, our walls are this thick, Kath, nothing, so relax, go to bed. Next morning, I leave. Son of a gun, if that tornado didn't just not even a quarter of a mile away. But my point being is, without building codes 200 years ago, isn't it interesting how they built things? But anyway, so what was your question? Dublin. So I guess you had a couple of questions that we were talking about kicking around in the beginning, and I know you threw out a pretty general one there, but
I could be more specific.
Go ahead.
Could you give us dollars of no, I'm lying.
Yeah.
That's the personal stuff.
This is being taped, right? No.
It is.
Well, I think one of the things that we talked about in preparation for this, and along with the theme, is we already talked about balancing economics and land stewardship, and then thinking about what we were trying to do and the design elements of what we wanted to do, and the Dublin Town Center project was I mean, there was about 11 parcels that we ended up pulling all together into one, and couple of older buildings that we wanted to make sure stayed there. And then new buildings that we built, townhomes that were built by Ryan Homes, the Lofts, which is a mixed-use building that includes 30 apartments and commercial space, brand new building. But then we had what we call the Square, which is, if you look at that picture, the big brick building, that was at one time the Dublin Pants Factory. Going way back, in the original portion of that building, it was built back in the early 1920s. They put an addition on in somewhere in the late 50s or early 60s. And when we acquired it, it was, a lot of people might have known it as the Dublin Tech Center. It was an incubator of sorts, but it had 7 acres with it. And you probably, most people didn't know that. And so as we looked at that, that became an opportunity in terms of, I was in love with the building anyway, because I drove by it for so long, and I wanted to do something with it. But then it became an opportunity. But what the real opportunity was, not just what I thought was a great idea, but what the community wanted, right? And so Dublin Borough, 12, 14 years ago now, they set out to come up with a revitalization plan for their community. So, balancing land stewardship and economics is important, but it's also equally important, maybe if not a little bit more, than balancing what the community wants. And so we've talked about zoning and building codes. Those things guide what you can and can't do in a community. And so they had sort of dreamed this out. Carter Van Dyke and the committee there, and almost 14 years ago, had plotted out more than what we did, but sort of the whole community. So we looked at that as a really unique opportunity. And I was just reminiscing not too long ago with Chris Hayes, who's the mayor, and we were talking about literally sitting in the parking lot of the diner, and he was cheering and cheerleading and cheering, if you will, the revitalization efforts. And at the time, I think I was a county commissioner. I don't know, it was somewhere in the beginning of all that. But I had done a lot of work in communities like Bristol Borough, New Hope, Ambler Borough, and places like that. And the one thing I said to him, I said, Chris, the one thing you have here is you've got a lot of land. You've got a lot of space. If you go to a Doylestown or a New Hope or an Ambler or wherever, they're already built up, and parking is a big problem, right? And I said, and you've kind of got this. And as I start talking it through him, I'm like, oh wait, this sounds like something I might want to do. And we pulled those pieces together. So we wanted to make sure, that we were intentional with what the community wanted, right? Obviously what the market would support, and what the best way was to reuse things. So we feel that we really developed a nice mix of restoring what we'll call kind of monument buildings in Dublin, and then also taking advantage of the real estate that was underutilized or unused in that regard. And the whole concept from the beginning was about building community, building a place where people could live, eat, drink, play, work, and that kind of thing. And that matched. That wasn't a Rob Lockery vision. That was Dublin Borough's vision that they wanted, and coming together with them and updating the zoning and all the things that needed to go with that is sort of how we ended up where we are today.
I love the before and after pictures. That's great. Can I also give credit to you for the left-hand turning lane coming down on the 315?
You definitely can give credit.
You paid for that then?
Yeah,
So
we
just
did.
give Rob a round of applause just for that, if
Yeah,
nothing
no
else.
kidding.
I tried to get an easy pass installed just so I could.
Just for you? Yeah.
No, for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That was very thoughtful. So I want to wrap things up and just ask each of you, we'll just go down the line. What is your hope for Bucks County in the future from a land development? And it can pertain to what you're doing. We'll start with you, Chris.
Oh, geez. I think what we've heard tonight, we're on the right track. I would love to see more of this. You'll hear from some that we've preserved all there is to protect with the land. I think there's a lot more we can do. Still, there's a lot of land that, needs either protection and or stewardship. and we're in it for the long haul, but I would love to continue to see these types of partnerships. And what you saw in some of the pictures for this Dublin development was the background vista of the farm fields. And, you know, we have just preserved over 200 acres along 313 that is just outside of Dublin. So it's all about that balance.
I'm going to just jump you, Rob, because we just heard from you. I'm going to go to Kyle, and I'll come back. Don't worry.
Jump you.
That didn't come out quite right. We're going to skip you, Rob, at this point. All right, Kyle.
I think Chris hit on a really good point, and I'm all about the balance. Yes, people need places to live, they need places to shop, they need places to eat, but we also need the green spaces, and we cannot forget about those. And the thing that is so unique about Bucks County is there's still a lot of these green spaces left. And to, well, let me just backtrack for a second. One of my board members, when I was here, oh my gosh, maybe 2 months, he said, I know how we can raise money. I'll just leak it to the newspaper that you're going to build condos all along East and North Street. And we need like $3 million in order to stop you. And I was like, well, how's that going to help me? You know, they're going to run me out of town. But I think that's something that's always in my mind. I mean, I'm here now and I'm not going to go forward with that, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what kind of situations are going to happen. And I think it's really important that we act now, that we continue this legacy of Henry Mercer that's been over 100 years already.
So I'm in this room. You got an audience here. You have some people online. What can we do to get involved right now?
Right now, we're in the middle of a feasibility study, and we will be having some public meetings to get some more feedback on what to do. But this is really going to take a lot of private money in order to do this. There will be some government funding, but this is the way I see it. I think our community has to come forward in order to preserve this land for our future generations.
Okay, great. Thank you. Joe, I saw the amount of research you put into this. Joe was my all-star. He gave me 10 questions on resilient design, and I think I've asked you 2 of them. So, Joe, tell us what we didn't get a chance to say that you think is important for the audience to hear.
Well, I think, we're talking about land use in a very specific way. We're talking about resiliency in buildings and sites, but one of the things that is a part of resilient design, and everyone started to talk about it, is community building and revitalization. I mean, communities need to acknowledge, changes in their physical makeup, their economic makeup, and the social environment. And I think, as I'm sitting here listening to everyone else talk, I just wanted to jump in, but I bit my lip. And
This is your chance, Joe.
but things like are happening in Dublin. I particularly am just tickled with that because I grew up just outside of Dublin and consider that my hometown. I mean, Dublin was a place that people just drove through because they had to get from Quakertown to Doylestown or Doylestown to Quakertown, twice a day. And it's rebuilt a whole community and provided hope and hopefully raised up, the socioeconomical standards and things like that. It's just a wonderful place to be now. And, I'm proud to be there. So that type of thing, along with, just down the street, Chris is talking about is how many acres have been preserved. So, there's a place, I guess what I'm trying to get across is there's a place for everything. It's not us against them. It's how do we work together in a smart way to look at things as a community and not just for ourselves, and Rob went through a lot of that with his. Chris and with everything they do, and now Kyle, I'm actually happy to be on the board as well, Bucks County Historical Society, so I'm getting a chance to be part of that, and it's just a really exciting opportunity to do some great things for the environment and give back to the community. So if we can do more of that and work together and all be one big happy family, it doesn't have to be all these little silos. It can be can be a community effort is what, and that's what the chamber's about too, is community.
Great. Rob, I just want to, you get to get the last word here. Do you have anything coming up that you want to tell us about? that Nehemiah's
I
working
got,
on?
I got a lot to tell you about, but I'm
I got like a minute and a half, Rob, so choose your words well.
a twist to what I think I would say, because I see Florence sitting out there from Habitat, and so we've talked about land stewardship, adaptive reuse, balancing of economics, and sort of the environmental things that we want to think about. And we talked about community being part of that. Affordability is also part of this mix. And so, I spent 9 years as a county commissioner and probably 20 plus years before that, and still going on. The county and the Heritage Conservancy has preserved a lot of open space, farmlands, bucolic, just wonderful, right? But the economics of that means that the supply is limited and the demand is still there. So the limited supply and the demand of people that want to live in Bucks County increases the value and increases the cost, thus making it challenging and unaffordable to live in this county. And so I think when we need to think about land stewardship and the economics, we also need to think about how we can make things affordable, because those that can't afford to live here are still working in this county. And that means that they're what? They're getting in a car, they're getting in a train, they're traveling distances. And so you think about how taxing that is on them, how taxing that is on the environment. I mean, that needs to be part of the discussion, I think, for the future in terms of thinking about Bucks County and thinking about land stewardship and the environment, because it's a challenge, and not to get into all of it, but you think about codes and approvals and the cost that it takes to get things approved and the layers that get on top of that, it prices people out of being able to afford and to live in Bucks County. And so that, to me, is probably one of the bigger things that the county and developers and chambers and businesses and conservancies need to be thinking about. We still want to preserve, we still want the bucolic, the beauty, and all the things that make Bucks County special, but we also need to make sure people can afford to live here. And I think that's a big part of how we got to find a way to balance economics, land stewardship, and how people could live, work, play in Bucks County.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of our panelists this evening. Could you all give them a round of applause, please? I just want to, in closing, I want to thank all of our sponsors, especially Carroll Engineering, celebrating 50 years, I heard this year. 50 years, that's awesome. Green Terra Disposal, Beata's here. You can always talk trash with Beata. She's got the disposal materials for her. I'm here with Harleysville Bank, Joe with Phillips and Donovan. Renee's here with the Sustainable Energy Fund. Thank you, Renee. I also want to thank Tom. I have no idea how this is going to look, but I'm guessing that he did an amazing job with graphics, and all of this looks fantastic. So that's Tom Brunt with TebWeb. Use them for all of your video needs. Anne Marie Metis, Portraits by Anne Marie. I know all the photos. You're going to make me look 10 pounds thinner, right? Awesome, great. Thank you for that. Graze Craze for donating our food. All of our A&E committee members who have been working and suffering with Joe and I through all of the committee meetings to put this together. No, actually, we have a lot of fun. This is my shameless plug for the A&E committee. If you're an architect in your room, you should be on our committee, okay?
Absolutely.
We have a good time, and it's also a great opportunity to potentially promote some of your projects coming up too. I was shamelessly plugging the tour in 2024, putting some bait on the hook out there, Joe. Also, our Central Bucks team, I want to thank them for everything. We can't do this without Brad and now Marjorie. The borough for using their building. We didn't bring any food in here, just saying that right on camera, okay? And lastly, I want to shout out to our friends with the AIA for coming out. If you're not currently a member of the Chamber of Commerce, you should be. We are all about promoting businesses and promoting our members. You can see Brad or myself afterwards. Please stay. We've got a tour coming up. I know some of the folks from Phillips and Donovan will be doing a tour of this facility. Do we get to go look at the jail over at the police side of the building? Yes, you get to go to jail. You can tell your family that you were in jail this evening, all right? If that doesn't get you, maybe you hang out after the tour for the after party, which is going to be at Chambers 19. We'll be immediately following the tour. If you have the energy to walk up the hill, up the main street from here, it's a cash bar. Bring your cash, and we'll have some fun there as well. If you want to ask questions to our speakers, tackle them on the way out. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer. So one more round of applause for all of our speakers. Thank you. Thank you.